Hi, welcome back to Astrology for GAN Traders. My name is Olga Morales. We have reached the intermediate level, lessons 5 and 6. Again, this is a double lesson. I've called it Lunar Vibrations. The focus of this presentation will be on the moon and its cycles, and I've called it Harmonic Moon Cycles in the Stock Market. The theory is that GAN, towards the end of his life, was only using the moon to forecast with. So it was a very interesting topic for me to cover, and just to see what sort of techniques we can apply using just the moon. So let's have a look. First of all is my copyright slide, as usual. All rights reserved, and also no part of my DVD may be reproduced in any form without my permission. And I really sort of expect that you will respect that. Also, disclaimer, all my charts and analysis are purely for educational purposes and do not intend to provide trading advice or recommendations. As you know, I'm not licensed to give any financial advice whatsoever. So this is all educational and helping you trade with added knowledge. So let's get started with the moon, a beautiful picture of the moon. Now, the moon transits one sign of the zodiac in about 2.5 days, which when you divide the month by 12 signs, that's what you get, 2.5 days. It moves 12 times faster than the sun. From one night to the next, at the same time of the evening, the moon's position lags relative to the sun about 12 degrees to the east. The moon moves through all 12 signs in about 27.32 days. That is called a one sidereal month, and about 29.5 days from one new moon to one other, which is called its synodic cycle. So the sidereal actually comes from the stars. So it's actually having a fixed point in the heavens. Just say you have a star, we'll say one of them fixed stars like Alcyone in the Pleiades, and you're wanting the moon to come back to that star, and that takes exactly 27.32 days, rather than it actually having to catch up to the sun, because the sun's moved on a little bit. It takes extra time, and that's known as the synodic cycle. From new moon to new moon actually takes 29.5 days. So you need to know the difference between those two dates. In the a lot of the calendars, like the Vedic and the Hebrew calendars, they were lunar based, and they were divided into 27 to 28 lunar mansions, and they're basically using this energy, the changing of the cycles in the signs of the moon, to give them their forecasting system. It's a quite different, the Vedic system, because each person's starts, basically their horoscope starts depending on the lunar mansion that they were born in. So there's a whole different thing, but we've got to remember a lot of the cycles in the Bible are based on the lunar calendar, and that was the beginning. The lunar calendar from new moon to new moon was really the foundation of all timekeeping in that time. So we need to remember that. Okay, and the moon does not orbit the earth in an exact circle and is not precisely linked to the solar day. The moon's path is slightly different, and its daily motion causes it to take about 30 days to go around the earth. So the lunar cycle, what else do we need to know about the lunar cycle? A waxing moon or bright half is strong and benefic. So that's the waxing phase, it's the beginning phase. It's moving from new moon to full moon during the first 14 days is known as a subcycle. The moon begins to get stronger and more favorable at about 72 degrees away from the new moon position, moving towards the full moon. Now 72, we're using the fifth harmonic here, so that's an important degree to be looking at as well. Generally, events that happen during the bright half of the lunar month get more support than during the dark half. Now, often when astrologers are looking at more favorable times for people to be doing or beginning new ventures, or getting married, or starting a business, or traveling, something where you want a positive growing factor involved, you would pick the first half of the moon, because that is where it's supported. So it's a growing phase, and so you'll be looking at that more favorably than the second half, which is the waning moon, or the dark half, is weak and malefic. So it was seen as, because it's losing its strength, it's also not a good time to be doing something that you want a favorable outcome, especially if you want growth. If you want something to decay or to die, like when people doing their gardening, the second half of the moon, or the waning phase, is when we actually do weeding, because we want things to die and we're pulling them out at that place. Not time to plant, to be planting seeds. Okay, and it is moving from the full moon to the new moon during its second half 14-day sub-cycle. So that's the waning moon. The moon begins to weaken and become unfavorable when it approaches again the 72 degrees of the new moon position. Some say it's at its worst when the moon is within 24 degrees or less of the sun. So this is right towards the end in the balsamic phases, when we'll get up to that. So here is an old picture. It's written in Latin, from an old book I had. And we're looking at the phases of the moon, which there are 8. And in here, symbolically, when we have a new moon at A, it's got A, it's like the beginning of in Aries, it's like the beginning of spring. So symbolically, the vernal, which is spring, this first phase, when we start, is like a spring phase in the lunar cycle. And then that second phase here, you can see Es Astartes, which is like summer in here, and then autumn phase in here, and then the winter phase in here when it's dying and it's balsamic. So we've got the new moon. The new moon, we know the moon and the sun are conjunct and is less than 45 degrees from the sun. So that's the first new moon phase. When we get to the crescent moon, the moon is 45 to 90 degrees ahead of the sun, and so that is called a crescent moon up to this phase. And then we get to B, which would be like a Gemini phase, the first quarter. The moon is 90 to 135 degrees ahead of the sun, so it's moving ahead and it's forming. And then when we get to the gibbous, which is like a Leo phase, we've got the moon 135 to 180 degrees ahead of the sun. So you can see that these angles correspond with the fixed signs. Basically, it's the 8th division of the circle, giving us 45 degree increments. Okay, so then when we get to the full moon, the sun, the moon is ahead 180 and up to 135 degrees behind the sun. So we've got a different thing because it's moving now the other way, and we can see that in the disseminating phase, the moon is 135 to 90 degrees behind the sun. So you can see that phase going there. And then the last quarter, the moon is 135 to 90 degrees behind the sun at D. And then this last phase here is when we get the real dying phase here. Remember, it's like actually as soon as it hits Libra, this is the waxing phase, this first half up to gets to C, and then from C to A, C, D, A is the waning phase. That's the dark side as well. But once we get to the balsamic, that's the last part, the last 45 degrees, that is called the balsamic phase, and that's really quite seen as a dark phase and like a 12th house type of energy. We're moving into the Pisces, that's very dark, and you shouldn't be doing anything important in that time of the lunar phase. If you're planning, you have important things to be doing, don't ever do it then. Only if you want something to end, it's a final thing, or you want to do something in a secret way. It's a hidden energy, it's not bright, so it's really the ending of something in that phase. So here is how it looks on the chart. So we've got a new moon. We see the sun in your charts. When you're looking at your new moon, you're seeing the sun and the moon together. So here they're conjunct in Pisces. Then the crescent moon, you'll see the moon has moved on, and it's 45 degrees from the sun. And then the first quarter, you can see that they're square. So the moon is exactly square. It's in Cancer, and the sun has moved into Aries now. So you can see they're exactly square at 2 degrees of a cardinal sign. Now we've moved again, the gibbous, and you can see the 135, the sesquiquadrate, the moon's moved on and it's in Leo. So it's just moved on from a trine. It's a little bit more because remember it's 135 degrees. Here we have the exact opposition, so that they're opposite. So you can see them opposite on the wheel. So here we have the disseminating moon. So this is like a 135, but it's on the inner side, or it could be the larger circle here. Okay, so that's disseminating moon. And then we have the last quarter when it's the waning square between them, and you can see that the moon is up here in Capricorn and the sun is in Aries. And then the balsamic again is that last 45, and you can see how it's catching up to the moon. So this is supposedly the hardest part of the cycle. Okay, and then again we've got the new moon, so you can see that the moon's had to catch up to the sun in Aries and at 24 Aries. So that is one cycle. So when you're looking at your charts, you know what you should be looking at. The phases of the moon are really important when you're doing an analysis, especially if you're a short-term trader. So again, let's have a look at the waxing and waning phase. So if we start from 0, which represents our spring or 0 Aries, this part, the first half again, from 0 to 180 is the waxing phase. So this is all to do with growth, development, expansion, moving towards fruition. Collectively, it produces a sense of optimism, initiative, exploration, and enterprise. So it's a growth period. Opposite, we have the waning phase from 180 back to the new moon's phase again, to the 360. And this is the waning phase, so it's distribution, dissemination, decay, return to the seed. Collectively, it increases caution, withdrawal, pessimism, and conservation and economy. So this is a dark phase again. So remember those two phases, and you've a big understanding about the cycles in the markets as well. Okay, now Gann, this is a copy of, I've got a copy of Gann's annual forecast where he used to use the phases of the moon. I think I've mentioned this before in earlier lessons, but basically he was given dates between, he said, however, the dates given will not always mark extreme high and low prices, but some kind of a rally or decline may be expected around these dates. So he's got the dates: January 9 high, 17 low, 23 to 24 high, and then 23 to 30 low. And he continues. And next on this page here, I've basically got from the US Naval Observatory the phases of the moon, and you can see the dates corresponding exactly with the phases of the moon. So the 9th was a new moon. The first quarter was the 17th of June, which Gann has here. The 23rd is a full moon, which he's got in here. And the 30th is was the last quarter. So he's basically going in this thing is saying high for the new moon, low for the first quarter, high again for the full moon, and low for the last quarter. But that doesn't always happen, as he always tells you, but there's always some sort of swing, but doesn't necessarily have to be a high or a low, and we've got to be careful of that. Don't expect that same pattern to happen all the time. It doesn't, because other factors are involved, being the other aspects that the moon is making at the same time when it's going through these phases. We've got to remember that all the other planets are involved as well. So not to use as just a general up and down, a high and low cycle. So basically I always do plot my moon cycles on the charts, and these are the moon phases on the dial. So the black dot is the new moon, and the white dot is the full moon. So you can see, and the other ones are the quarters, the first and last quarter. So basically you can see a lot of these highs have actually been near a new moon, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen exactly as a high, but you will get some sort of reaction on those times. Now the full moon, obviously people are more emotional, it's got a strong pull on us, like I've described before. We know statistically there are more incidents of lunacy, rape, aggression, people hurt, like the hospitals are full of people because there's more violence, people are on edge, and there's a real emotional risk-taking energy too. You know, people are more willing to risk at that time. They're more vulnerable and irrational, so they can do sudden things that they would not usually do. You've got to be very careful at those times, and we know that. Okay. Then basically what I've done here, using Timing Solution, which does all the statistical analysis for me, is actually it's plotted the moon phase on the dial. And what I've done, just to make it easier, basically you can see that there are 8 phases. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I've named them at the top so you know. And basically it's kind of giving us a curve of what over many cycles the dial usually does in terms of the moon phase. And again, the first part is the waxing phase, the growth phase, and the waning phase is the second half. So you can see how it actually does play out in this sort of, you can see just after the full moon, which is this part here, that we've got quite an empty space in there. But also there's more growth on this side here, rather there's more decay on this side. So basically we go new moon, the crescent moon, first quarter, gibbous, full moon, disseminating, last quarter, and balsamic. And see how it goes towards the balsamic. It starts increasing again to the new moon. So the new moon overall in this analysis tends to be more a positive growth period, like we know, but after the full moon and to this disseminating, this last quarter seems to be very low as well. Here is what it looks like plotted on what I've done is basically just done the phase. So it would have been a new moon to the new moon, which starts on the red again here, and just plotted what that energy actually looks like. And in this month it looks, you know, pretty much the same. It did go low there, pulled it down into this period too, in this last phase here, the last quarter. And so this is interesting analysis, especially if you are a short-term trader. You should be watching the moon phases very carefully. And I know some traders that use the fishing almanac very well, basically using the tides, and fishing, the best time for fishing is also supposed to be related to the best time for trading and not trading. So there's another area for people to be looking at as well. So what I've done here is same sort of analysis. It's the phases of the moon with coffee. Now as I progress through the lesson, I'll look at Gann's chart, where his coffee chart, where all he was using was the moon sign. So I thought it'd be interesting to have a look at the moon phases on the coffee as well. And you can see this pattern here. This is the strongest pattern in the coffee for the moon, and it looks like again near the opposition or the full moon phase, it dips quite dramatically. So there's the stats for the phases of the moon basically showing that. So you can see how when we've got this red highlighting, that means there's a lot of synchronicity in that phase, and it's a hot zone. So you can see into that opposition we do get quite a low energy as well in coffee. So that's quite a dominant cycle in there. So if you're trading coffee, you should be watching your moon cycle as well. So let's have a look at also knowing another really important thing about the moon and any planet. We know this is elements. You know, we've spoken about this in the beginner's course. We've got the elements that we need to be looking at. Okay, so the market tends to go up when the moon is in either a fire or an air sign. They're known as masculine. Remember in the beginner's course, or diurnal signs. So diurnal means of the sun. So it's more sun energy. It's a masculine energy, and they are Aries, Gemini, Leo, Libra, Sagittarius, and Aquarius. Okay, so they're known as the masculine signs or diurnal signs. In comparison, the market tends to move down when the moon is in an earth or a water sign, which are feminine, and they're nocturnal. So they've got more a lunar, feminine, passive energy, and they are Taurus, Cancer, Virgo, Scorpio, Capricorn, and Pisces. So again, we have got a duality here, like we've I've described in the beginner's course, it's always the yin and yang, masculine, feminine as well. So we have diurnal signs, which are more like the sun and masculine, and we have feminine signs, which are more like the moon and nocturnal, and they're more passive, okay? So it's a passive aggressive type of energy. So we get more bullish and bearish. In general terms, that's what we're looking at. So here, an interesting thing about this chart, when I was looking at it, you can see symbols on this chart. What is got here, May, coffee, moon signs, okay? And if you look carefully up here, you can see a sign of Aries there, okay? So, and then along the bottom, he's got Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. Now, we all know, if I'm just repeating those signs, you should automatically know what element those three signs are. Okay, now I'm wanting you to know that, so I've written it for you actually. The moon is in a fire sign. Why has Gam plotted only along the bottom when the moon was moving into a fire sign? Well, look, the high at this particular point was in Aries, which is a fire sign. So he's actually wanting to see the moon come back to that same element. This is why it's so important, and we'll do a little bit more analysis on that as we progress as well. So let's have a look. I'm going to present a small animation and just explain what that all means. Okay, now we're going to have a look at an example of how we can apply some lunar phases to the market. It's a little bit like what Gam was doing on his coffee chart, where he was looking at every time the moon came back to a fire sign. But what we're going to be doing is looking at taking a major turn and looking at the actual relationship between the sun and the moon and what phase they were in. So here I'm picking that low in March, on the 6th of March, and we'll have a look on that day what was happening. And you can see the sun was in 16 Pisces and the moon was at 16 Cancer, so they're trine, both in a water sign. So that is important. We want to see if that actually has an influence in the future. So what we can then do is have a look at these two, the combination. So basically we want to know every time the sun is trine the moon, so we add that one. And then we also want to know the position. So where the sun and the moon are in a water sign, we add that. And so we have both their formulas, and we have a look every time it's going to scan those two combination for us. And we can see here when they both, those two qualities line up, we can see again when the sun and the moon will be a trine and in a water sign. That's the highest point in here. So then what also we can do is just have a look at how far is the spacing between these points and how far the sun has moved. So I will just put it down here and have a look. I'm just going to drag it to that point there, and so we can see it's trine. The sun has moved 122 degrees. So we've got a trine. Of course it's going to be trine because we're looking at it every time the sun has to be in a water sign and the moon's there as well. So we're looking at a trine formation, and this is part of the Gam's emblem. We know that, dividing the circle by 3. So here we have it every time that combination comes up, and the next one will be obviously in July. So it's every time the sun is in a water sign and the moon meets it at that point as well. We've had some turns at that point. So that's an easy way to have a look. And if we want to have a look back, there's some major turns as well if we even go back at those points. So you can see how looking at the relationship between the sun and the moon is really quite important, but looking at exactly what their aspect was and what sign they were in terms of quality or mode. So it could be, were they in cardinal signs or were they in the elements of water? So it's always the division of the chart that we're looking at here. So this bar will keep going. I think I can continue that, but that's how it's looking. Okay, now let's have a look at something different, another point in the market, which was the high in October. And so let's have a look at what the relationship between the sun and the moon was on that day. And here we have on the 10th of October 2007, we can see that the sun and the moon are conjunct. So that's a new moon phase in Libra. So that is a cardinal sign. And so let's have a look at what happens with this. Again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to locate when the sun or the moon, first of all, aspects, we want to know it's a new moon. So we're going to have the sun conjunct the moon. So we say that. And then we want to see its position. We want it in a cardinal sign because that's where it was in Libra, is a cardinal sign. So we then asked to calculate. So let's have a look. So these again, all these peaks is when that repeat phase and also the cardinal appears in the market. Sorry, in the day. So if we go in a little bit, we can have a look. That's the October one. I'll just bring that in, and I want to get the planetary bars again for that point, and we're going to put in the sun and the sun from here to that point there. Is 90 degrees, because remember we're working with a cardinal, mutable and fixed and mutable. We know are 90-degree divisions, so we can have a look now. Every time basically we're just using 90 degrees of the sun, solar degrees, and the moon is there at the same time, so the moon has to be in a cardinal sign. So here we go, we have all that 90 degrees of the sun moving, and then we can still project that forward. So this is a simple way of using these phases of the moon, and also replicating either the element they're in or in the mode. So it's just a division of the charts, but we're using the sun and the moon in their synodic cycle. So hopefully that is helping you understand how you can use these simple cycles to plan ahead and putting them, and you can see major turns at these points. So we know 90 degrees is important. So basically what we've done here is we're doing 90 degrees. So every time the sun moves again into a cardinal sign, but then we're waiting for the moon to be there as well. And then the other point where we took from the March low, we were looking at them being in the same element, which was a water sign. So again, projecting that 120 degrees. So we've got a 90-day cycle and a 120-degree cycle. Okay. Okay, now we're going to be looking at the perigee and apogee moon and what that all means. So the perigee means when the moon is closest to the earth, whereas the apogee is when the moon is farthest from the earth. The cycle is 27.321666 days from perigee to perigee or apogee to apogee. In the moon's monthly movement around the earth, in perigee it is typically 14.5 degrees per day, and in apogee it's around 12 degrees per day. So you can see quite a lot of difference there. The average speed of the moon is approximately 13 degrees per day. So you can see the ratio between the sun and the moon is always 1 to 13 in an average situation. So let's have a look at the moon's orbit around the earth. Now it's when the moon is in perigee, you can see its distance. That's its distance from the earth. But when it's in apogee, the distance is quite further away, and the variation between that distance is 12.6%. So you can see quite a bit of difference between its speed as well. And this is a quote from Jack Gillen. He's an American astrologer. It's done a lot of work on the moon. He actually has a book called Rhythm of the Moon that people want to get their hands on. Now, if the moon is fast, there's lots of activity in the market, or if it's slow, change is predicted. Now, the actual gravitational pulling and pushing of the Earth can vary up to 23% each month, which explains variations in tectonic activity. In Newton's theory of gravitational force between two bodies increases as the distance between them increases. It is this variation of gravitational pull of the attracting body, that is the Sun pulling the Earth and the Earth pulling the Moon, which causes a speeding up and slowing down of the Earth and the Moon in its orbits. Around perigee, when the gravitational force between the Earth and the Moon is its strongest, the Moon moves faster in its orbit. So this quote from a reference from the Lunar Code, a book written by Ken Ring, a fantastic book if you want to read all to do with the Moon, lunar cycles. It's excellent. Now, he found that a lot of his work basically came about when he spent, he's in New Zealand, he spent time with the Maoris, the indigenous people there, and how they used to fish. And basically, at perigee, there's the extra gravitational effect whips up the tides and the weather, causing higher tides and rougher seas, and fish don't come near the shore at this time because of the churning of the sea near the shallows cause sand to get in their gills. But at apogee, when the Moon is far away, therefore having less pull, the conditions are calmer and the fish tend to swim closer to the land, so fishing was obviously better at that time. Now, the other thing he writes about, which I've going to present to you, first of all, when you're wanting to find when the Moon is perigee and apogee, there's a calculator. The website is down here, and it actually, you can just put in the year you want to and it will calculate it for you. So basically, we have the side on the perigee when the Moon is closest to the Earth, so this is for this year, and the opposite apogee when the Moon is far from the Earth. So you can see basically here what these F and N mean. That means if it's a full moon or a new moon, if it corresponds at the same time. When it's got two crosses, that means that in this month, in January 30, the perigee moon happens also to be a full moon, so it's very close, only 2 hours apart. So that is termed, Richard Knoll in America has called them supermoons. Basically, they're the closest either full or new moon to the Earth in the year, and they tend to be times when there's more earthquakes and natural disasters happening around that time, just because of the gravitational pull and all the plates of the Earth moving at that time. So it's very interesting research if you like to looking at these sort of things. This is what we should be looking at. So basically, this is your calculator for you. Now, in timing solution, you can plot these gravitational pulls of the Moon on your charts, and basically I've highlighted that 30th of January this year, which was on a supermoon, so that was the perigee and happens to be also the full moon. You can see that there, and then there'll be another one that will be in September, so that will be another high point. So basically they're the highest points. That's a highest, also the highest gravitational pull happening at that time. So you can see why this swings a lot higher, and then it sort of eases off and then it goes up again. Okay, and you can see that a lot of these swings are in times when they have the same pattern as the actual stock market as well. Now also, the perigee-apogee cycle alternates every 4 years. So every 4 years, the perigee also changes hemisphere. So about 4 years, apogees and perigee swap positions. For example, in 1997, January, February and March, new moons coincided with perigees. But in 2001, new moons in January, February and March coincided with apogees. So I'm just going to show you that here, 4 years from 4 years ago in 2006, you can see that there was another perigee on the January 30th, but this time it wasn't a full moon like last time. It was actually a new moon. So they actually swapped, even though the date's pretty much the same for the perigee, we've actually got a swapping of the new moon and full moon phase. So this is what it looks like. Again, we can see the swing around the same time, but if we wanted to plot the new moons and full moons, they're different phases of the moon that are corresponding, but the actual perigee apogee is actually very similar every 4 years. So you can see it here. What I've done is you've got the 4 years ago on January 30th, you can see the new moon here in 9 Aquarius, but after 4 years we have actually a full moon on the 30th, so we can see their opposition. And you know what I love about this is that Mars is involved. You can see that in the first time it was actually square in Taurus, so it's a fixed thing, right? So it's square, and now after 4 years it's actually opposite, and again it's in that fixed sign of Leo. So you can see this 4-year period is also having a Mars energy as well. That's something for you to explore. Mars is very much, its cycle is very much linked in with the lunar cycle as well. Okay, so this is what I've done here. I've overlapped it. I've taken the 2006 which is a blue trend of the S&P, and I've overlapped it on the current chart as well. So interesting to see it. Basically what I'm doing here is wanting to see if the gravitational pull of the past is actually being replicated, probably not to the same extent, but you can see some lows and highs in these similar areas already. Now we're going to double this. We're going to do the 8-year cycle just to have a look, and basically it's a little bit different. It's just moved a month out, but you still got a perigee on the 30th of January. Again, it's a full moon, and so that is, but it's moved on a little. The highest point is moved on a bit. What I mean by that is that the highest perigee, which is not actually, it was actually on the two crosses, actually is a month later. Okay, but what's fascinating about this is 8 years ago, you can see that we've got the full moon in 2002 and then the full moon in 2010, which is 8 years, and just pretty much a day, well, not quite a day, but you can see how it was a full moon, both are full moons, but look at what's happening. Venus is involved, because remember the 8-year cycle is a Venus cycle, so that it was conjunct pretty much the sun here, and again the sun 8 years later. So you can see not only Mars is again in the picture, but Venus. So the Mars-Venus cycle is very much related to these lunations as well. Here we get to the bigger lunar cycle, which is 19 years, and it's called the Metonic cycle. Every 19 years the sun and the moon come back to exactly the same point in the heavens on the same day, and it was known anciently as a very important cycle, because basically it was amazing for them to think of the coming back to the same point, and the calendars obviously were very important to them and working with this Metonic cycle. So I've gone back again. Now they're not linking up the perigees here, but what is interesting about it is the Metonic cycle is actually mentioned in Tunnel Through the Air. Again, talks about his major motors campaign being he mentions how Major Motors is turning 19 years old and how it was important. Now I didn't have Major Motors stock data to actually overlap it, but what I've actually done is overlap the 2 years again mentions, which was basically 1908 versus 1927 on the Dow, and it's a Metonic cycle, and I've just overlaid them, and you can see how the pattern is very similar for those 2 years separated by 19 years. Okay, so then I've extended that. What I did for last year was the Metonic composite. So I've basically taken all the data I had on the Dow going back to 1885, and I've taken these slices of these 19-year periods that overlaid them, pretty much what Gam would have been doing, like he did in the major motors. But what I've done is done more years, and you can see this. Obviously there was a big peak here, but overall you can see how there's some, especially some synchronized points where they're quite obviously very similar. Now what is amazing about that, I haven't mentioned eclipses as much, but imagine if an eclipse, if you're looking at an eclipse point, so there was a solar eclipse on the September 22nd 1987. Now if we're looking at, we know eclipses, a solar eclipse has to be when the sun and the moon are conjunct, so it's got to be a new moon. Okay, so you've got to imagine that then 19 years later we're going to have another eclipse, and it's going to be exactly the same point, because it's a metonic cycle. And so this is what I've basically plotted for you. So you can see it was at 29 Virgo, it comes back and it's 29 Virgo again. But have a look again. What have we got? We've got the moon, the new moon, but we've got Venus and Mars on both sides. And again, on the second time we've got Venus and Mars. They sort of swap positions. You know, this is fascinating. When you start looking into their cycles and why this is happening, things start evolving and start, your eyes and your cycle work becomes very intriguing, because you can just see how their cycles are harmonized, and why Venus and Mars, known to be the planets of the lovers, is so important, and why Tunnel Through the Air is a romance novel. Okay, we've got to be thinking about that, because it's all symbolism. Now this was the Dow in 2009 last year, what it looked like. And when I looked at all the metonic cycles, the 19-year periods, it was actually the 1933 that seemed to be the most synchronized with 2009. And when you calculate the difference, it's actually 76 years apart. So you can see them here. But what's fascinating about this, not only about the 19-year period, so it's 4 times 19, but have a look at some of the major planetary lineups. You can actually see that Jupiter is coming back to where Saturn was in that period, and then on the opposite side you can see that Saturn's come back to where Jupiter was. So that looks almost like a bit of, you know, synastry here in terms of symmetry, well, almost like an Antisha type of representation that we did in our other lesson. And then Mars is involved as well. Mars is in here and Mars is in here. So you can see the 19-year period and Mars and the major planets like Jupiter and Saturn coming and forming these alignments very systematically, very symmetrically, or geometrically, whatever you want to use. There's maths involved, there is symmetry. You know, Pythagoras was teaching about the harmony of the spheres, because you can see how these cycles are within cycles. So you've got a larger outer planets, and then you've got the smaller cycles, but they're like harmonics of the larger ones. So you can see how it really is a wheel within a wheel. Okay, it gets very exciting when you look at it this way. And so you can see, obviously on a 90-degree wheel, you can see how these line up beautifully across the dial. Okay, so that's a 76 years apart. So now what I've done is, for this year, I've done exactly the same thing. So this is the metonic composite for 2010. I basically used a price slicing tool you can do on Timing Solution and overlap them, and you can see I've put the dates there for you so you can see what's what. Basically you can see around here, the end of April, we've got quite a bit of timing where there's a high period, and then a low towards the end of July in here, a little bit of an uptrend into the end of August in here, and then again a little bit of a spike in here in September. But overall this period then from late September into the rest of the year is showing an overall uptrend. So that's interesting. It's interesting when you're looking at this way, and then thinking about what aspects we're having in the year. Do any of them then correspond with these periods, and how you would then incorporate those synodic cycles into this 19-year period. That's what you've got to add as well. Okay, you can't rely just on this cycle. Now we've reached the lunar nodes, which is my favourite topic, also known as the draconic cycle. So what are the lunar nodes? Here we have the sun, the earth travelling around the sun, and the moon's orbit around the earth. So we have 2 points where these intersect, these two lines intersect. This point here is known as the north node because the moon's actually going north and it's a latitude at that point, and here is a south node where it's going to its southern latitude. So that's, sorry, I should go back to that. So you can see these 2 points, and so there's no body. Some people think that like the lunar nodes is like a planetary body, but there's nothing. It's just a mathematical point actually of 2 orbits intersecting. So the axis of the nodes moves retrograde, taking 18.618 years, or which is 6,800 days to complete a revolution. It moves 19.618 degrees per year. To the ancients, the nodes were thought as the head and tail of a dragon that swallowed the moon and the sun during the eclipse. So the north node would be the head and the tail would be the south node. The nodal period is also called the draconic cycle. The sun meets the node every 173 days, and it meets a particular node after 2 of these periods in 346 years, also called an eclipse year. 18.618 squared equals 346.62 days. Its quarter cycle phase is about 4.5 years interval and spans 18 to 19 months, transiting through each sign of the zodiac with an average motion of 18 to 19 degrees. 3 nodal cycles takes the same time as 2 Saturn returns, approximately 56 to 58 years. Now the amazing thing is, if you've ever looked at the tarot cards, now Gann had one of those books on his recommended reading list, the tarot. If you happen to look at a deck, if you've got a deck with the numbers, you'll see number 18 and 19 of the tarot cards is actually the sun and the moon. Well, actually the moon and the sun, because the sun is 19 and the moon is 18. So you can see that their numbers and this cycle is actually already encoded within the tarot cards, because they were, the tarot cards, well, their history is basically knowledge that was encoded in these cards for only the select few to know. But then they were the little from Egypt apparently, and maybe even before then, who knows when it was, but it was the symbols and the numbers in those cards has actually got very sacred wisdom in there. But a lot of it has to do with planetary cycles. Everything was to do with the cycles of the planets, of their gods, all the gods and the myths and their relationships with our planets. So you can see how it's all encoded in these cards. Now here we come to a point where what's called lunar seasons, high and low moons. Now high moon and a low moon phenomena was very important to the ancient cultures, because the moon was important to agriculture, hunting, fishing, and to their fertility rites. At the time of the high moons in winter, the nights were brighter and the moonlight lasted longer, whereas in winter full moons are far in the northern skies, while the summer full moons lie low in the south. The ancients were anxious to know when eclipses would occur and were very aware that the moon affected the ocean tides. This is from a site by the Weather Sage. If you want to go and have a look, she's got some really interesting things to read on there. The lunar nodes move backwards through the zodiac in a cycle of 18.6 years, and after 3 such periods, the nodes lock into an exact cycle of 56 years. On the average, the lunar node cycle is repeated in patterns of 19, 19, and 18 years, and every third swing is separated by 56 years. The 56-year pattern of the moon was noted particularly by the Celts. The stone circles in Scotland, England, and Brittany demonstrate that these historic people were aware of the 18.6-year lunar cycle of extremes high and low. At Stonehenge, around the circle of standing stones in the second circle of 56 holes, known as the Avery Circle, this 56 lunar phenomena is worth watching for mundane and financial predictions. Now here I've got a reference to page 56 and Tunnel Through the Air. It's actually the only page where Gann specifically talks about eclipses. Now I want to tell you a funny story. When I actually gave a lecture, I called it for my group, my local meetings that we have for the Astrological Association. I did a lecture on called Eclipse in the Stock Market, and all to do with this 56-year cycle. And when people came for to listen to me, they were given a raffle, like a door raffle, to get a raffle prize, a prize at the end of it. And you know, and at half time when I went to pick the number and I opened it up, it was actually number 56. It was like the most, I was so shocked by it. I was just hysterically, I was actually shaking, because it was just like, it was amazing that I was spending the whole lecture on this cycle of 56 years and the raffle ticket happened to be 56. So everyone gave a real gasp of laughter, and we all, it was hysterical actually. So amazing. I think something was happening there called synchronicity. Okay, so this is what these high and low moons look like. So you can see that in 1987, when we had the crash, it was actually a period of the highest point, which are called major lunar standstill. So it's the highest point. Now the moon at this point is reaching 28.5 degrees, because what's happening here, its highest declination usually is 23.5, but then the moon has inclined by 5 degrees to the ecliptic as well, which is called its latitude. When we add that 5 to the 23, we end up getting this 28.5. So this is the highest swing. So at that time when that happens, the node is actually in Aries. So you can see it's at 0. Okay, so 0 means 0 degrees of Aries as well. In terms of, remember when we're doing declination, 0 is there. Then after 9 years, the half of the cycle, when it's the nodes in Libra, we get the minor standstill, and we get this lower point here, and that's plus or minus 18 degrees. Okay, so you can see this swing. Amazing how it works in these swings. Now the book that I mentioned before by Ken Ring, where he looks at cycles of weather, basically is all to do, in his book called The Lunar Code, is all focused on this 19-year period. So if you want to go into depth, I highly recommend that book. It's awesome. Now here we come to another fascinating look, exactly in terms of the gravitational pull and what we don't actually see, but on an energy level, this is what we need to be aware of. This is called the moon wobble, and there's an astrologer, not alive anymore, who was called Carl Payne Toby, who did some research on the moon wobble, and I'll just quote some of his findings. All solar and lunar eclipses are moon wobbles. The moon wobble maximum is 86.5 days of a period of 3 weeks. Begin 2 weeks before and 1 after the exact event. He discovered that disasters happened about every 3 months and correlated with geometric square to the possible eclipse point. During the moon wobble periods, time and space are unstable. Look for when the sun is conjunct or square the node. So basically you can see what I've done here on the graphic ephemeris is plotted the node going through, and you can see how at this point it actually, I call it going crazy, leading up to the eclipse. Basically the eclipse is here, and then we've got the middle one here, the solar eclipse, that's a lunar eclipse. So you can see in this point near the eclipses that the node actually does go crazy, and it's reflecting, it's going, it's erratic, it moves direct, station, retrograding, making erratic patterns during the weeks leading up to the eclipse and after. So this is when the moon wobble, and it's the pulling on the earth and the sun and all the gravitational between the 3 bodies that are actually you can see the result of the node because it's reflecting that. Okay, and this is where there's high probability of disasters happening, earthquakes and so forth. Basically, it's all gravity. So I thought you'd be interested in this cycle. This cycle is obviously related to eclipses as well, which I won't be focusing on in this presentation, but I will in the future. So the moon wobble cycle is 86.5 days, and what I've done here is basically plotted this cycle on the S&P. So you can see a lot of the turns actually happen every 86.5 days. So it's a short 4 days, less than 4 days of the 90-day cycle of the square. Okay, and here again continued basically with this cycle. Moon wobble, what I've done here is actually put in the bars the actual distance so you can see it more clearly how that actually looks. So what I'm actually plotting there is when the sun is either conjunct the node or square the node. Okay, so you can see that it's peaking, it's very low actually when they're 45 degrees apart when in this point here, quite high in their trine between the sun and the node, and then dropping dramatically after their square in here, and then picking up quite dramatically towards the end, their last sextile in that last period, and then dropping off a little bit. Now what I've done, I'm using this cycle, I've actually plotted that on the S&P again, so you can see the highs and lows of this sun node cycle, and basically it's like I'm plotting that high and low moon, but depending on what phase we're in at the moment. Basically it's amazing, these moon wobble. So why have I been focusing on the 18 and 19 year cycle? Because of this table. This is called Gann's Financial Timetable, which he compiled in 1909. Now if you have a look, he's got these years, but also a legend on this side here about what these years should hold. But if you look at it, counting them, they're either separated by 19 years or 18 years. So there's an overlapping of 18 or 19 years, approximately 18.6 years. So you know what it is. It's the nodal cycle. And then he has got a code like all these years. A, he's saying extreme low price, stock prices, strikes, actually despair, and it's quite negative 4 years down from there. Sorry, up from there. What I've done is, just to make it clearer, I've replicated the chart, and he's actually written extreme low prices, strikes, repression, despair, beginning of new business generation of years, 4 years of rising stock and improving business, market spare of goods, young men become prominent. So basically that is the red zone, so I've color coded it when it's supposed to be an extreme low, and then after that we can go up for 4 years. 4 years into this B years, which is supposed to be high stock area. Then we go into C, which is panic years, and then D, low stock prices, so we've got the D zone there, and then high prices again for E. Now some of these years are not, he's only got years on certain years, and there's a bit of a juggling in this period. F is panic, so we've got E, F, but some of them don't have the code on it. G, again, his legend is low stock prices, so they're the years supposed to be all the G's. H, very high stock prices, most prosperous year, waste over extravagance, most money in circulation, much speculation, so they're the H's. Okay, and the J is the panic, major panic crash, 4 years of falling prices, business stagnated, bread lines, soup kitchens, despair, unemployment, so that is that J period. And then K is like A, like strikes, unemployment, many prominent deaths, so you get the K being the A. Basically that's a whole cycle. If that was in a circle, which I will show you, it's beginning and end overlapping. So this is his financial timetable. Now, here we come to another lady called Louise McWhirter's North Node business cycle. Her research basically is all to do with the nodal cycle and business, and it's the most amazing book. If you want to get your hands on it, I've already spoken about it in previous lessons. I highly recommend it. What she found in her research was that many recessions in the US could be explained and predicted by the moon's north node cycle. Her research showed that the low point of US economy was reached when the north node transits through Aquarius, and the highest point is when it was in Leo. Whenever the north node passes through Scorpio and Libra, there is a transition period as the curve passes from normal but slowly going into normal. Taurus is a transition point from normal point as the curve goes from normal to below normal in business volume. When the north node enters Aquarius, the low point of the business activity has been reached. As the node transits Capricorn and Sagittarius, the normal position of the business curve is below normal, going to normal. That is the natural position of the curve without the presence of secondary factors, which can distort the curve favorably or unfavorably from 1 to 20%. So this is basically what the cycle looks like. So she found that prices were up when the node was in Leo, go down approximately for 4 years or into when the transition period was when it was in Taurus. Then the low was when the node was in Aquarius, then slightly going up into normal, into Scorpio there, and then the high point again into when it reached Leo again. So basically, the fixed signs of Leo, Taurus, Aquarius, and Scorpio is when it's the quarters of this cycle. So it's 4 years, 4.5 years that you get high, a transition period, a low, and a transition period. Basically, this is what it looks like graphically. If I represent it another way, is she has above normal when they're in Leo, normal when they're in Taurus and Scorpio, this line, and below normal when we're in Aquarius. So these are the years that she's highlighted, basically for when there's supposed to be a peak in business cycles, and the low in the years down here, and then a normal sort of period when they're in Taurus and Scorpio. So hopefully you understand what is going on. So it's basically just a swing of those cycles. Now, why? I asked myself why those particular signs are so important. Why is it when it's in Leo and Aquarius? Well, if you have a look, well, I always like to go back to some natal chart. If we look at the chart of the American independence again was using, which is the Gemini chart, which I've described before, you can see that the node, like the north node, is in Leo and the south node's in Aquarius. Now, the nodal axis, as I've described before, is very much a karmic axis. Now, the north node is known to be more a strength and a high spot in the chart. It's also more on a positive level, whereas the south node is known more as a negative. It's our weak spot, our low spot. So isn't it interesting that that is reflected in the business as well, the business cycle of the country? That the low, think of the head is where we ingest of the dragon, that's where we eat and we grow, we nourish ourselves, whereas the tail is where we eliminate, and so there's a weakness there, it's where we're getting rid of things. So it's amazing that in the American independence chart, it's actually this axis that is very important and reflected in the business cycle as well. So let's have a look. Louise McWhirter talks about secondary factors that you have to consider as well, besides the 19-year nodal cycle, which raise business. And these are the factors that raise business. So when Jupiter is conjunct the north node, this is good. When Saturn is trine, sextile, or semi-sextile Uranus. When Jupiter is in Gemini or Cancer. Now, why is that? Remember, when we've gone through other lessons, that Gemini and Cancer is very important to American charts. Gemini is because it's the rising sign of the American independence, and Cancer, remembering we had a whole lot of planets in Cancer when it was the 4th of July chart. Remember, we had the planets on the sign, sorry, the star of Sirius, and we had the Cancer involved there. So also when Jupiter's conjunct, sextile, trine Saturn and Uranus went in aspect to each other. So it's a whole bringing of those three planets in harmony, in positive aspects together. The North Node in Gemini and favourable aspects to Pluto. So they're all the positive secondary factors which raise business. On the opposite side, the secondary factors that depress business are Saturn conjunct, square or opposite the North Node, Saturn conjunct, square, opposite or semi-square Uranus, Saturn in Gemini, Uranus in Gemini, Uranus square conjunct or opposite the North Node, and unfavourable aspects to Pluto. Now she concludes, the rise and fall of prices is governed by the law of supply and demand, which in turn is governed by the law in the universe known as the law of action and reaction. Periods of business prosperity and depression are not man-made, nor the result of chance. They come at regular intervals, the same as seasons, and the same astronomical laws which govern nature, govern man, and all man's activities. When this fact is recognized, man will work in harmony with the forces of nature and not blindly against them. That's a fantastic quote. Okay, now what I've done here is I'm going to look at McWhirter's cycle, business cycle, with her secondary factors included, plus I'm going to also include Gann's financial timetable and his legend as well, just to have a look how they are actually working, synchronized if you like. So basically what I've done here is I've gone back, we can see the Dow, this is going back from 1885, and on the bottom we can see the node moving into the signs of the zodiac, which is approximately 18 to 19 months. Okay, and then what I've done, this blue line here, this trend here, is basically I have made a model using Louise McWhirter's secondary factors and made like a trend according to the factors that she specified. So basically if it's down, it's negative planetary energy, and if we have these up peaks, it's positive secondary factors that she's highlighted. Like for example, in this period here, Saturn was conjunct Uranus, square the node, square Jupiter as well, so that was a low period. So then you can see the node, so remembering that Aquarius is the low of her cycle and Leo is the high of her cycle, which is this point here. So this is what we're looking at. Okay, these two signs mainly, Aquarius low, Leo high. So let's have a look. And what I've done here, I've got Gann's legend. So A for Gann was extreme low stocks, 4 years rising, so that's the 4-year period according to him as well. B for Gann was high stock prices, so that is in that period. Then we have C is a panic in here, and then low prices for D, so that's pretty synchronized in there, and it also is synchronized with Louise's secondary factors as well. And then we have low stock prices for D for Gann, and the E section is actually high prices. Now can you see that his E is actually also when the node is in Leo, so they're high stock prices. So that is amazing. In that period, that is working really, really well. Let's have a look at this one now. So we've got the high point when the node's in Leo, and then we go to F. There should be a panic in there, which is a panic. Yes, we've gone right down into that period. And then low stocks for this G, Sorry, that should have come up a little bit later. And H should be very high stock prices, so it's only, I suppose it's missed out a little bit in here. It's gone up, but then it's come lower. And J is supposed to be a major crash, so that's actually in that period here. It's gone down into the J, yes it has. And K is starting all over again when the node is in Aquarius, which is a low point, and that was actually the war period. So that was synchronized with that extreme low. So let's have a look at here. Again, we're starting the cycle again. So Aquarius is supposed to be the low point, which it is. B is supposed to be a high point, moving up, so 4 years up from that point, which it is pretty much. And then we move down into C and D, which are panic and low stock prices for GAN. Down, yes, that's working in there. And then basically up again into the node into Leo, which is working again in that period. So here we have the high period moving into the high into Leo. Then G is supposed to be low stock prices, and H high stock prices in there. J is supposed to be a major crash period, so it was in that period when we had the 1929. So the crash periods are actually lined up with the node being in either Taurus or Scorpio. So remember, they are the 4-year period, so they're the fixed cross that we're looking at for this cycle. So J is supposed to be the major crash. So after that point we got 4 years of falling, which is pretty much in sync here. And then the K again is the low of the cycle, which is when it's in Aquarius again. So here we have the low, so it's supposed to again go up for 4 years into that B point, which it has. Now C and D again is supposed to be a low point, low prices and panics into that period, which we can see some low activity in there. E again is supposed to be high stock, but here no, that did not work. But can you see, according to the negative factors, Louise, we've got a lot of negative energy happening in 1942, so that obviously has distorted that cycle and hasn't been in sync there with the nodal cycle. So again, we start with the period with the Leo, and moving up into G, we're supposed to be low stock prices in here. Not really, I suppose, no. H is supposed to be the very high stock, so I suppose it was a little bit earlier in here in the H when it was supposed to be in Gemini. And J is supposed to be panic, major crash period. Well, not so much in there. There's pulling down of energy in there, I suppose, and not a major crash, depending how, if we go into there. And then K again is the should be the low period, but actually in here not so much. This is actually not a low, so there was obviously some secondary positive factors in that point that's actually distorted the cycle. So if we go back to A again in 53, we're going up. This actually works from the low going up again for 4 or 5 years into B. Yes, there was high prices. C and D is supposed to be low, but in this point, no, they weren't. This era, no, because we've actually got a high point into here again. So that was not one that actually was as clear as some of the others. And E is supposed to be high stock. Yes, that's correct. F is supposed to be a panic, and there was a panic in there. Look at that, bringing down into 63. So here we have that panic into F, which is quite good there. And G low stock prices, but actually we're going up into this period. H is supposed to be the very high stock prices, which it is in that point. J again is supposed to be a major crash, and we have pulled back into that in 67. in there, and K is supposed to be again the bottom of the cycle, which it was in 19 when it turned into Aquarius, but a little bit earlier there. So that's pretty well synchronized in that period as well. So let's have a look at A again in 71. We should go up for until B, but that actually is not. B in 1974 was a downer, which actually should have been up higher into period that should have been a B, which was high stock prices. That's another distortion in there. C and D was supposed to be our low panic and low stock, whereas it's inverted. So that cycle in that place has had an inversion. And D is a low stock note. Well, it did turn into D eventually in here. And E was supposed to be again the high, where it did eventually pick up into that period. Okay, but you can see here there's quite a few secondary factors that were pulling it down as well, so that adding to the negativity of that period. So let's have a look at E, F, G, and here we've got basically the should have been a high in this period and the low in Aquarius, but this time we did not quite. When there was the stock market crash in 87, there were a lot of secondary factors that also were pulling it down when it should have been probably going up. Eventually it did, but it's supposed to be in a low period in Aquarius, but instead it's actually a high period, so there's an inversion in this area as well. So let's have a look at 90 going up. A, it's supposed to be going up. Well, that's sort of a general little trend there. It's not anything too, the swings aren't as obvious, I should be saying. Basically this is supposed to be the low period, but we are still in an uptrend, and that should have been a high, which it is. So the still came in on a high on the Leo, even though there were some negative factors. It was pulling them down at these points. Some of these points it still managed to get a high when it was in Leo in 99. So there it is in there. And then we should then again in G, panic. H is supposed to be high stock, but it wasn't in here. We've got some negative factors bringing it down. J, major crash period. So obviously there's a little bit earlier in here, so that's not quite synchronized with the cycle. But the K is supposed to be a low period in here when it went into Aquarius, and that actually was very much synchronized with the low in 2009 that we've just sort of had and pulled back into that period. So here is the code again, the legend for GAN. A is extreme low and we go 4 years up. B, high stock price. C, panic. D, low stock prices. E, high stock prices. F, a panic. G, low stock prices. H, very high prices. And J, major panic, 4 years down. So basically it's up from A to B, down into C, D, and then up again into E. Okay, so that's the overall sort of pattern for this cycle, and I've put in the secondary factors as well in here. So this is basically, if we follow GAN, we should be going up into the period of into 2002, 2001 to 2002, and then coming down into 2013 or 14 when it's CD. The legend, and then going up into 2019 and 18-19 when again the node is in Leo, and that's the high point of the GAN's E, which is high stocks. So let's have a look at GAN's financial timetable. He's got his high stocks of E is when the node is in Leo. The panic is in Cancer, low stock is in Gemini. The major panic 4 years down is when it goes into Taurus, and it goes down into Aquarius, so that's approximately 4.5 years. We know the cycle, it's quarter, and this is A, so the extreme low 4 years is his A, slowly going up until it gets to Scorpio, but then we have a panic, and then low prices in D, and then again we go up to the high price of Leo. So have a look. This is basically timing solutions, looking at the overlapping or the composite of the nodal cycle on the Tao, and you can't see these high points in Leo pretty much in here, and the low points in Aquarius and Pisces as well. Actually more in Pisces in this one, but you can see in here there's an Aquarian hotspot as well. So it's that period between Pisces and Aquarius where there's a low point. So looking forward, what I've done here is actually plotted basically a composite of that nodal cycle that I just showed you, which is the red line on top of the Mercury cycle, plus with Gann's codes on the slide, just to get an overall feel of what we should be getting. So basically we should be going up until this B period, which would be until parts of 2011, and then slowly coming down in C and D. So we should have a low in from 2013 to 15. D is the low stock prices, panic in C, so that's reflected in here. And then from that point up, we should be going up where we get to E, which is the high stock prices, and that's 2018 when the node is in Leo again. So that is basically the financial timetable of Gann's cycle and also the Mercury business cycle all synchronized together. Here we've had a lot of, we know that there's a lot of the secondary factors that have been happening recently with the Saturn Uranus opposition. We've had a lot of that. We've had the Saturn opposite Jupiter, so they're all negative factors that are coming in at this time. We've got a lot of positive energy coming up there, so that might lift it out of that panic zone and start lifting it up. We've got some negativity in some of these periods, but also this positive energy exactly where when the node is in Leo, so that's coming for, you know, in the future. That's where we're looking according to these cycles what it should be looking like. So that's the end of this lesson and presentation, and the references I've used, authors of Louise McWhirter, Ken Ring, Carl Payne Toby, and of course W.D. Gann. And the software I've used is Solidify Gold and Timing Solutions. So I recommend that you Google these authors and you find anything they've written and spend some time if you like this cycle. It's an amazing cycle. And just further your own sort of work and look at all those secondary factors and have a look at times in the past when things haven't quite synchronized and why they may be. I didn't have enough time to go through all of them with you, but that is now your chance to further your knowledge and looking at some major aspects and what was happening. And once you start reading Louise's work, you'll actually understand a lot more now, and looking at the secondary factors that she used to determine the chances of the cycle not being so synchronized. So okay, so that's the end of our intermediate course, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to preparing the advanced lessons. Hopefully I'll have them ready by early next year. It may even be earlier than that, but I'll be working on them fairly shortly. So thank you very much. Bye.